Hi everyone, welcome to this mini lecture which is about Episode 9, A Toast to Actium by Horace, published in about 30 BC. So this is obviously really relevant to the Imperator theme, but we'll also discuss how other themes might also tie into this. I'd recommend that you write a few notes, or you have the poem in front of you and add a few notes to that, or if you like, just listen and enjoy. Okay, so a few important points to note beforehand about poetry is, first of all, poetry would be performed as well as read. Now, what that means is you don't necessarily have to be able to read to be able to access it. But obviously what we don't know is where it was performed. Some argue that it was performed in public places, at festivals. Some argue it is only performed at private dinner parties held by the elite. So we don't know. But when you talk about it only being available to the literate elite, be careful. Okay, because you want to be getting that kind of level 5 analysis in, and the complexities that we think about on this slide are really important for doing that. Often Imperial Image questions talk about success of propaganda or success of Augustus, and just the fact that we have the sources we study is an indicator of a level of success, particularly with poetry that has got quite a lot of survival to do in order to get to us nowadays in whatever year we're listening to this in. It has to be copied again and again, it has to be published again and again, so the fact that we have it shows that it was successful. Another thing to remember, it was also part of the cultural revolution that Augustus wanted to create. So he wasn't just about getting poets to write brilliant things about him, he was about getting poets to write brilliant stuff, full stop, that then his rule, his reign would be remembered for cultivating this kind of brilliance. So remember that as well. Okay, a few really good scholars that I've got here that I think would be very useful for you to engage with, because they can be applied to any 30-mark essay where you're talking about literature. Okay, Jenkins, he has quite a different view to the one we talk about in class quite a lot, which is that only a minority in the Roman world was literate, and poets like Virgil and Horace wrote only for a minority of that minority, a highly educated elite, so not just an elite, but a highly educated elite. And I suppose you could use that to say actually it wasn't very successful, that maybe the fact that we have it today is just by chance, or it's just because the elite are so good at preserving stuff for themselves. I don't know. Also, what is interesting about Jenkins is that he says such people couldn't be deceived, they knew. And what he's talking about there, and you could use this as a separate bit of scholarship, is the fact that often what we get in the poetry is not historical facts, it's a poetic interpretation, and the people who were listening to it, who were reading it, would have not believed that what these poets were saying was the truth, because that's not what the poets said they were doing. Tarrant builds upon the idea of what the poets were and were not told to write, by arguing that Maecenas allowed writers the freedom to express their support in ways congenial to them. So Tarrant's still saying that the poets were there to express support, but also Tarrant is saying that these poets could not be dictated to, that they had to be free, they had to have a freedom for their creativity. And Augustus wanted to be celebrated by those great writers, so they must have had a certain amount of free rein. Goldsworthy suggests that if the poets didn't favour the restoration of religious rights, the return of stability and the defeat of dangerous foreign enemies, this would have been unusual. They weren't writing propaganda, just echoing the sentiments of the time. And this is one of my favourites, because the time the poets were writing in was one of peace, of abundance, of growth, of happiness, and they were just reflecting that in their poetry. So lots of key things there for you to remember. So this is the first section, and notice how it starts with a real celebratory vibe. We've got him addressing Maecenas, so immediately it feels personal. We've got words like pleasure, delight, triumph, drinking, festive, lyre, flute, sound, mingling, melodies, all really positive language there. This is the stuff people love. And what is important here is that from a sort of historical perspective, this is 30 BC. The Roman world is not yet at peace. The civil wars are not really done. I suppose maybe in hindsight they were, but Horace wouldn't have known that. The Romans wouldn't have known that. So here he's asking the question, when can we celebrate this triumph? And it came obviously a year later in 29 BC with the Triple Triumph. But that question, it hints at uncertainty, but it also, that whole opening part of it hints that celebration, the good times are on the way. Then the mood very quickly changes, doesn't it, to something more militaristic when he talks about Pompey. And here we're talking about Sextus Pompey, driven from the sea. This refers to the Battle of Naulochus in 36 BC. And we've got a different type of language now. We've got words like fled, driven, destroyed, threatened, shackles, faithless. The mood changes. This is why Horace is so fantastic. All of a sudden, Horace is reminding us about how dark things have been. But also how powerful Augustus has been, or I should say Octavian, sorry, how powerful Octavian has been in driving him from the sea. Notice how Octavian isn't mentioned by name here. I suppose we do have Caesar before that, but this sort of relates to what Jenkins was saying before, is that the people who are accessing a toast to Actium would have known that Agrippa played a key role in both of these battles. We also here have a really important reference to the propaganda that surrounded the civil conflict with Sextus Pompey. He was very much depicted in the literature, in the propaganda, as a threat to Rome. He's threatening the city with shackles. He's going to enslave the city. And also the fact that he was associated with slaves and befriending slaves, all very negative, all excellent propaganda. Let's get rid of him. Let's get rid of the memory of him. Let's make people only think of him as bad. But again, maybe that elite of the elite would have been friends with Sextus Pompey. Maybe they'd have been on his side. Maybe they'd have been sympathizers. How would they have taken to this? I can't tell you. I don't know. All right. The next section, this is focusing on Actium, and is perhaps the, even though this is called a toast to Actium, and notice how it's called a toast to Actium, this is about celebrating the victory, but this is pretty much the only section which really directly refers to it. Okay, so we've got the Roman there, that's Mark Antony, and also a very interesting phrase here, you'll not credit it posterity. That's referring to the fact that Horace wants to be remembered. He's hoping this poem is going to be read by students in 2021 or 2022, whenever you're listening to this. Sadly up sticks and arms himself. So we've got a sad tone there, the use of the adverb for a woman's sake. Again, no name mentioned, but we know who that is, don't we? It's Cleopatra. And then we have reference to her withered eunuchs. Eunuchs were young boys who were castrated. Well, you can look that up. And they were very much sort of sneered upon by the Romans. It was a sign of luxury and stuff. And then we've got the word shameful. So withered eunuchs implies shame, shameful implies shame among the warlike standard. At the site, 2,000 Gauls chanting Caesar. So this is a reference to the sort of legion, I'm going to call them. They probably didn't call themselves a legion, but the Gallic soldiers who started off on Mark Antony's side and then went over to Caesar at the last minute. And Horace uses this beautiful metaphor, turning their snorting steeds aside. We've got very auditory language here, chanting, snorting. All of these things sort of give us this impression of noise. And the opposing fleet, when ordered to larboard, so that's Cleopatra's and Mark Antony's fleet, remained there in the harbour. A very still, effective phrase there right at the end. Okay. Hail triumph. So we've had all of this, oh, poor Mark Antony, well, not poor Mark Antony, oh, we feel sad that he's gone, Pompey, blah, hate him. Now it's all about the triumph. Hail triumph. Why delay the golden chariots and the unblemished steers? Hail triumph. So that repetition shows the triumphant imagery. And then we get on to this next section, which is basically saying that Octavian is better than Jugurtha and Scipio Africanus. Well, not better than Jugurtha, better than Marius and Sulla, who defeated Jugurtha. Sorry, who was the king of Numidia in North Africa, and that was at the end, I think, of the 2nd century BC. They, in the war with Jugurtha, you never return such a general to us. We have to assume he's talking about Octavian here, but he could be talking about Agrippa. That's controversial. Okay, nor was Africanus, whose courage made a tomb for himself of Carthage such. Now, I would say it's almost hubristic to be saying that Octavian is better than Scipio Africanus. Who knows what's going on there? But, you know, he's talking about really great generals who've got their places in history. And these generals were not fighting civil wars, by the way. So maybe this is part of the myth of Actium to show this is very much a great foreign war. The enemy, this whole section here is talking about Hannibal. Some people have immediately latched onto the fact they must be talking about Mark Antony, but he died. He didn't flee to Crete. What they're showing here is that Hannibal of Carthage, he fled, he escaped, and perhaps there is a comparison there between Mark Antony, apart from the fact that Mark Antony obviously died. But the emphasis here on Hannibal and Scipio Africanus is really just bolstering this view of Octavian as defeating someone in a really brilliant battle. Okay, and then last few lines. Bring more spacious bowls. Pour the Chian, Lesbian or Cuban wine. We're talking about great vintage wines here. That's designed to prevent all seasick qualms. And I think that's sort of an allusion, maybe a humorous allusion to the fact that we've been talking about a sea battle. Let's delight in banishing fear and anxiety. And again, this idea, this is what Caesar has brought everyone. Positive language used there. Spacious, pour, designed, prevent, delight, fear, anxiety. Love it. It's such a sort of positive, it ends in such a positive way, but then we have got that sort of darker middle, the very sort of imperator militaristic middle. Okay, so things to consider about this poem, just before I finish off, is most people, as we've talked about, would have been aware of exactly what happened. There's no mention of Agrippa, but everyone would have known he was involved. It's very militaristic, but shows hints of celebration that is to come. Very much part of what we call the myth of Actium. So portraying it as a foreign war when it is a civil war. A couple of bits of more scholarship. Beard suggests that the poets made the war against Cleopatra as a struggle between the virtues of Rome and the dangers and decadence of the East. And you could use the withered eunuchs quote to support that, to engage with Beard there. And then Beard also argues that Actium was made out to be a much more impressive encounter than it actually was. All the emphasis was on the exotic rabble rather than the Roman Stanisters, who were also on Antony's side. And it very much feels like this is being made out to be an impressive battle. Okay, so I hope that's helped. Take care, and hopefully that'll be useful for revision. Goodbye.